So I was at home, kind of bored. My schoolwork was done, so I asked Mom if I could go to Depot Town for a while and meet up with my friends. She said sure, but be home before dark. My uncle next door drove me over and dropped me off. I met up with my friend. He's 5 years older than me, but that's okay. We met some other friends from West Junior High, so we hung out for about an hour at the train depot. So I had to start back home since my walk it's just under a mile. I've made this walk hundreds of times. So he walked my part of the way near the river, then he went on his way home. Oh, I ran into two more friends fishing at the footbridge on the Huron River, so I stopped to talk to them for a few minutes. Now, I don't know what it was, intuition or just a feeling, but I asked them to walk me home. Don't get me wrong, I can take care of myself. I just felt a little unrest. Well, they said no, so I went on my way. So from here, I only went down the tracks, past some old buildings and stuff, then I'm at La Forge Road. I'll be just fine. It's only half a mile or so. I hear the Wolverine coming in on time. I better walk fast. It's getting dark. Okay, made it to the crossover. Now over to the corner at the freight year, then up to the house. Mom's gonna be mad it's almost dark. Wait. Who's that? Okay, I'll just walk over here, away from the car. Okay. There's a scary man in there. I'm just not gonna make eye contact. Okay, just keep walking. Just keep walking, Dawn. Just keep walking. Oh my god, okay. He's following me. I think he's following me. Leave me alone!
We welcome any legitimate law enforcement agency that has something to contribute. We've thought of the possibility of everybody except the good Lord himself.
I think it could be the work of several people working in concert.
I wouldn't speculate on that.
Speak for me.
Dawn Louise Basom was murdered April 15, 1969. She was found on a desolate road in the early morning hours of April 16th, lying north of Reland Road on the embankment of Gill Road on the right side. She was just 13 years old. No one was ever convicted of her murder, no trial, nothing. Sheriff Douglas Harvey was the first on the site when the body was discovered.
There's no problem between the police officers on this assignment. And any newsman that attempts to read such a problem into it is something of his own making. And I want to make that real clear at this time, so there's no misunderstanding. The police officers can work together and get along. And I would appreciate it if the newsmen would try to leave it that way and not try to create dissension, because it is not here.
On April 15th, Dawn was dropped off at Depot Town around 6 p.m. to meet a friend. She stayed with him and some other friends she knew for about an hour. They walked behind the old train depot, long since shut down, then up the tracks past the Michigan Ladder Factory. She then went alone up the tracks by the Huron River until she saw some friends fishing at the footbridge that crossed over the river. At this time, dusk was approaching. They talked for 5 minutes, and Dawn asked if they would walk her home. They declined. It was getting dark. When asked by the police, the boys said that Dawn didn't act afraid, so they didn't think anything of saying no. She was last seen at the brief 40-foot shortcut that leads from the Penn Central tracks on Railroad Street, running parallel to the side of the tracks. The train was due. The Wolverine, one of the last running passenger trains, arrived on time at 7:25 p.m. A 31-year-old railroad buff living nearby was waiting to time the train's arrival. While standing on a knoll alongside the tracks, he said he saw Dawn rush past him. He last saw her approaching the old Riverside building. The cook on the train said he saw Dawn walking down the railroad street around 7:35 p.m. when the train pulled out on schedule. The sun had set at 7:15, so it was already dark. Here at this section of the tracks is LaForge Road, where Dawn would turn right and head to her mother some 200 yards up the hill to the right. However, back in 1969, there was a small freight operation on this very corner. Today, the 40-foot crossover that Dawn walked over is gone, and the freight yard operation that was there is now apartment buildings. Here is a Landsat satellite image of this corner in 1969. In this photograph, we have added her path in red, that is according to the eyewitness accounts. We see the 40-foot crossover where witnesses placed Dawn when the Wolverine was waiting to depart. The blue ellipse is the area where the abduction occurred, which places Dawn a mere 200 yards from her home. From this point, Dawn was taken against her will in a car that passed right by her mother, and then north a half a mile to an abandoned house and barn. Here is a satellite image of the house and barn in 1967. When they arrived, the killer took Dawn to the basement where the assault began. It is now around 7:45 to 8 p.m. Articles of her clothing were found outside between the house and the barn. This same barn would be burnt to the ground 29 days later. Investigators believe Dawn escaped the basement and ran outside, where the killer caught up to her, struggled for her life, and then ultimately her death. Why is it so hard to correct myth? Crimes can be committed and no one can be charged or held accountable. For Dawn Louise Basom, who was murdered over 54 years ago, her case has never been officially cleared. No one has ever been arrested for Dawn's murder, and no one has ever been sent to jail. However, if you Google her name, you will quickly see that she is considered to be one of the victims of the 1960s coed murderer, John Norman Collins. Is it true? Or do we just think that? Just because she is always listed as a victim of John Collins? That is the question True Crime Incorporated is asking. We ask that, and yet why is it so hard to correct myth?
Welcome to another episode of Two Average Joes. We're here to present True Crime Incorporated. And today what we're going to do is talk about why is it so difficult to find myth and to fight myth. And the truth is we're going to use the case of Dawn Basom, and there'll be information and links down there so you can go ahead and hit them and look at it to get more specifics on the case. But Dawn is one of those people where if you Googled her, you would think John Norman Collins killed her, and possibly he did. But you would think he was convicted, that there was a trial, that there was all of this hoopla around it, when in actuality, there's very little. And what happens is we go back, we look for information, and many times it's just cut and paste. It's just things that we have found that they took from some other area, stuck it in a book, stuck it in a blog, made a video of it, but really don't discuss the fact that we have lots of murders where people think they know who did it, but in reality, they don't. And I think Dawn's a very interesting one because in going into the coed killers or whatever you want to call John Norman Collins, hers is different. And I know they all are different, but hers are extremely different. This is a big changer for me. This is a game changer. I see this as a completely kind of different situation. And Dawn is 13. And that's a big difference. And she's not a co-ed. And to be honest with you, she is walking railroad tracks, if I'm not mistaken. And she is not looking for a ride. Okay, and there's been some speculation that she coulda, shoulda, woulda, but there's no proof of that. Robert, you had some search on there and got a little information. Tell me what you got.
Dawn Basom, I believe she was a eighth grader. She was last seen on April 15th, 1969, which is we're just a couple of days away from what her would be her anniversary of her death. It is, she went to go see her boyfriend at the time, who was 18 years old. His name was Earl. According to Earl James's book, Earl says that they were just friends, and he never even tried to kiss her, let alone have sex with her. I'm a little suspect of that. She was seen by two friends down by the Huron River, and she sat and talked to them. They were fishing. And she talked to them for about 15 minutes. It started to get dark, and she asked them if if they would walk her home. They said, no, we live in the opposite direction. She walked on along the railroad tracks towards her home about 2 miles away. And it was just getting a little bit dark. A guy who was a 31-year-old railroad buff saw Dawn and identified her. She was wearing an orange sweater, and she had just dyed her hair. I think it was strawberry blonde. So she was pretty distinctive. She was a pretty girl. Looked, they say older for her age, but her face in the pictures that we've found, she still looks like a child, 13-year-old child.
Yeah, she looks 13 to me. Yeah,
she's really athletic, supposedly. So her body may be more adult developed. She was walking when this railroad buff saw her walking down the railroad tracks in a rapid pace. She got down the road, and I guess a cook threw a menu at the dude, and so he quit looking at her. There was a 75-year-old that had seen her. I believe that's the last known person to see her. She was walking fast towards her home. He knew her, so he knew who it was, and to see anyone else walking in the area was not unusual. The interesting thing is, okay, so that's the kind of the last time she was seen. And
I think we've got it measured at 200 yards. She's away from her house. Most of John Norman Collins' stuff, he did giving people a ride. She wasn't looking for a ride. Okay. And I think we can go into a little bit about there was other suspects. There was other people out there. So we want to address that. So I'm going to let everybody else introduce themselves. Again, I'm Joseph St. John. Got 30 years of law enforcement. Deneen, let you know who you are.
Deneen Azzolino. I'm Joseph St. John's research assistant, and I also edit on Southern Gothic Creations.
And Robert?
I am the other two average Joe. If you go back to watch the two average Joes, we've been on a sabbatical, or at least I have. Health issues, job issues. I'm an attorney practicing in Michigan. Most counties, I do a lot of criminal law defense, appellate, litigation, trial work, experienced in all of that. Joe and I had completed, I don't know how many episodes it was of the actual
Lots.
murders. I think it was 18 or 20 episodes. We did 2 on each victim, and then some victims that were believed to be victims. The John Norman Collins and his cohorts, which we believe, if it was John Norman Collins, that he had help, and at least 2 or 3 other highly probable suspects
Yes.
that were with him when the murders occurred. So it's nice to be back. Joe and I have been talking behind the scenes. He's been carrying the water for the last 6 months or so. So Dawn Basom is different because she was 13 years old. And all the others, I think except for one that was still in high school, late high school.
She's late high school, but that was a different setting, totally.
Yeah, but all the rest of them were college co-eds, either going to, I believe, other than that high school gal, went to Eastern Michigan University or University of Michigan. And so, Soldier on, and Dean, you could introduce yourself.
I'm kind of new on the block. Dean Teester, citizen investigator, and 22 years of being a producer on motion pictures.
And Dean is our newest addition, and when you go back and look at some of the other videos, you can see that we ratcheted up. Getting that. Dean, one of the interesting things, and I think we really need to address it, is it really starts with a lot of your investigations, a lot of what Deneen's looked up, me and Robert, and doing ours. And one of the things is that John Norman Collins' situation becomes pretty big, and he's basically convicted of one, homicide, and then between the papers and everything else, he's getting loaded up with everybody. And that's basically what we have. But we also know we've got evidence where he's talking to other people. They hear more than one voice, And most importantly, we've got this whole belief system, and talking about fighting myth, where they go, well, the murders quit after John Norman.
Yeah.
Not true.
Yeah.
Not true. We're not going to get into all of them, but eventually we will tap in them. But I think, Dean, you would feel comfortable to say that is not true.
Definitely not true. Yeah, we get into it later, but I think that the key there that really catches my interest is that John Collins was interviewed by, I think it was Marilyn Turner, somewhere in the 80s. And during that interview, she asked John something along the lines of, so John, how do you feel about the fact that when you were arrested, the killing stopped? That might not be her exact words, but it was close.
Right.
And John, in his words, replied back, but they didn't stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The murders stopped when they arrested you and took you in.
And it would be similar.
The murders stopped.
No, they didn't. I don't think they did. And I don't think
You
one
don't
person.
think they did? Tell me.
Well, from what I understand, they didn't. If any reporter had ever followed up and checked the police files or the hospital records or follow the news articles after the trial, they would find that there was still murder. There's still murder. I just showed you the article in the paper. There are still murders going on.
Yes, but
Unsolved
shortly
murders.
after that, those types of murders stopped.
Okay, now what do you mean by type? See, they referred to these as coed killings. Now, there's at least 3 or 4 of them that weren't coeds. So even that is a fallacy.
Well, they said that there was a similarity. There was always sexual abuse. There was
there wasn't. No, there wasn't. Some people.
4 out of 7, I believe.
Okay, that shows a dissimilarity.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, they didn't. And I think that's one of those things that when we're dealing with it, and we've dealt with it from the beginning, is everybody, I just think there was a time and place where people wanted this to be over. So they go, well, there's no more murders. But trust me, after you get done listening to this podcast and several other we're going to do, you're going to realize that was not true.
I think there was a lot of pressure being applied from the governor's office in 1969 as well.
Yeah.
I believe it was Governor Milliken had brought in the Michigan State Police and put together everybody at the church, and the pressure was on. So
I think one interesting thing is at the beginning of this video, we do the kind of introduction of it. There's like a mention from the sheriff, and help me out, Robert, the sheriff's name.
Harvey.
Harvey. Like, we get along, we all get along, everybody gets along, right? Well, good luck with that. That's not the way it works. Okay. They were under a lot of heat. And I can only imagine the amount of heat and how it got after a 13-year-old was murdered, or the heat that you got when another teenager was murdered. Though I want to be careful, those are 2 different type situations, totally 2 different type situations. So you got to kind of keep that in perspective and go back and go, okay, we start watching this stuff, and if it's happening here with Dawn Basom's case, if it's happening here with John Collins' case, before you just start reading stuff and go, hey, I know all of this, let's be real careful. Because I think there's a lot of stuff out there that's basically just cut and paste history. That's what I really think it is.
mm-hmm.
And Deneen, without going into complete detail, we looked at some things this weekend and they got a little crazy.
A lot of it was a person saying he ran into John Norman Collins a couple times and knew he was a big dude, and he knew there was something wrong with him. And John was in his apartment with a girl, supposedly.
Allegedly.
And he had the guy, he went into his dorm room and he had his big friend with him, and the big friend stared him down. And John left with no problem with the girl.
I will call that myth.
Yes.
I think y'all all heard it. I have a very bizarre, if you want to call it that, version of eyewitnesses. It's not your story. Okay. You know what he said, Dean? They will turn it into their story. Not your story.
Yeah.
So, we got to go back now and say, okay, Deneen's seen what she saw, and she's reading this off of a blog, and we haven't read it anywhere else. And there's all sorts of things that pop up, but there's no evidence.
Right. It's all assumption.
That's the tough thing about all of this whole case, though, is that one, it's 50 years ago plus, right?
Right.
And then secondarily, the source material is non-existent. I mean, we had, I sat down with Larry Mathewson, who is in all the books, okay, because he was a campus cop during that time. He played basketball, intramural basketball with John Norman Collins. He ran in the neighborhoods of all of this stuff. And we have the interview on the Two Average Joes. And unfortunately, I bought a brand new camera and it didn't work for about half an hour, 45 minutes. I did catch the most salient fact that he said. And then I asked him who said that. And he says, "You subpoena me and I will tell you." And unfortunately, he is dead. So there is no subpoena that will be coming his way.
Right. So
Yeah.
even the people that are involved in this,
Yeah.
I mean, they're not coming for it right, clean right from the beginning. And I'll have
Yeah.
a link down there about Larry's video.
Matheson,
We
yeah.
have on top.
But back to the myth and what you were saying about the murders not stopping. Okay, this is what's interesting. And kind of when I got the information about Dean, and what's the guy's name? Weingartner or something like
Yeah,
that?
Weingart.
Wingard.
All right. I didn't realize, and when we were doing all our 20 episodes of the Michigan murders, that one, Michigan was a killing field at that time.
Yes, crazy, but
And
true.
that there was at least 3 to 5 prolific serial killers, not named because that wasn't in the lexicon,
Right.
running around Michigan, and a bunch of them converged on Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti
Right.
at that time, between 67 and 69, 70, actually.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Didn't we find that the Boston Strangler might have been there?
Yeah, not the one that
Weingartner.
they accused him
Weingart.
of, but one of the first suspects, yes.
Right. And then I believe, and Joe and I have been batting it around, that there was a team of serial killers doing this stuff. And because there are bodies left from Ann Arbor to California and back.
Right.
And Mathewson said he believed that this team or individual killed somewhere between 35 and 50 people. They didn't even have a number to put on it.
We got the one, even though we call it the Michigan murders, but we got the California one, and they were pretty sure one in Iowa.
So the myth that the killing stopped, I don't know how that was perpetuated, although we kind of furthered the cause when we were doing our podcast on that, because that's what I believed.
Yeah, it takes a lot to switch that up. And Dean, without going into too much detail, because we still haven't gotten all the facts. I mean, there's a car that actually shows up, basically, same kind of car, 3 times. Is that a correct?
Well, that's one of the things that really struck me in all the research that I've done, which it's been very difficult. As Robert said, there's really not much out there. And if you FOIA the stuff, you're lucky if you get something that is not more than a pack of nouns and verbs and pronouns and what have you.
Redaction.
It's insane. So the thing that really struck me, that I had not seen anybody put this together. So the first thing, I guess I looked at it this way. If something happens, I'll call it a coincidence. If something happens twice with similar data points, I'm going to call that probability or probable. If it's 3 times, then I'm going to call it highly probable.
Right.
So I'm looking at and I'm reading all this data, and on one of your podcasts, your and Robert's podcast on Dawn Basom, you bring up the fact that some witness said they saw Dawn in a red car when this witness was going for pizza. And they walked by and they saw Dawn go by or sitting in the car with a guy. The car happened to be red or burgundy.
There was a maroon car with 3 guys in it. That was
yes.
There's at about 7:30, a neighbor was going to another neighbor's house to order some pizza. And as she walked, she saw a red or maroon 1963 Chevrolet. She observed a girl sitting close to the driver. She was wearing a lighter white colored blouse. Miss Basom was wearing a white blouse at the time.
Was she wearing a white blouse?
She was, but she was, it must have been under the orange sweater. She was wearing an orange.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. There was a second vehicle also parked there, and that was a blue Beetle type Volkswagen. dark or light blue. There's conflicting testimony on that. And two young men were sitting in that between to be 23 and 25 years old. So Joe and I have talked about it. Our working hypothesis has been either John Norman Collins killed all of these women, either individually or with other people. Could have been Gary Leiterman, could have been some unknown suspect or suspect.
Right.
So that's kind of our working hypothesis. We have not committed, though we strongly suspect.
And we have a strong suspicion.
Right.
The problem that I have, and going back into what he's saying, that there's somebody that actually saw two cars,
Mhm.
two different people in it. Yes, Dawn is wearing a white blouse, but it is underneath an orange sweater. Let me get, for people that don't live in Michigan, it's April 15th in Michigan. It's probably still a little chilly.
It's April 17th right now, and it was 30 degrees yesterday, and I suspect, I haven't been out yet today, but I suspect it's 30 degrees.
Yeah, so you have that. Here's been my stumper all the time with all of these cases. And it's why we have tried very hard to keep an open mind about everything. Okay. I think we are now, I mean, unless you just want to discard this witness who has no reason to go out here and lie, and she seems to be credible, right? You have two cars. You have a series of people. Okay. You go back to the second homicide with Shell, right? She gets in a car with three people. Okay.
Red Chevrolet with a black top. Suspected vehicles, which we had said is Chevrolet, with damage to the trunk, red. 63 Chevrolet. I'm not sure how they determined it was 63 Chevrolet. And the other was an old Volkswagen Beetle, which we had mentioned. If you remember back to the Iowa State victim,
Mm-hmm.
Sheila Collins, she was last seen getting into a light blue, dark blue Volkswagen Beetle. So there seems to be a recurring theme.
No, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, the one thing that I would say is a red car, this 1963 Chevrolet, is probably a clue.
I don't have any idea why that's not followed. That's what I meant. I have no reports, right?
It could be evidence, right?
I would think that was a hint.
And then the second occurrence comes in the Joan Shell case when a red car with a black top pulls up with three men in it, picks her up. And I'm thinking, that's interesting.
Right.
So I took into account that the witnesses all had different perspectives and different ideas on the car. Some thought it was a Ford, some thought it was a Chevrolet, some thought it was a 63, some thought it was a 66, some said it had stacked taillights. So I went down the rabbit hole. And I looked at all the cars in the 60s that had stacked taillights, and we all know that that was very prominent in Pontiac, especially the GTO Tempest Le Mans in the 66, 65 time frame. Thinking, well, there's a possibility. And then I looked at the number 3 in the taillights and thinking that maybe the witness used the wrong word and that the taillights actually went horizontal.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking into that, and bingo, I start getting all these hits on, again, Pontiac, but now we're in the line of Bonneville and Star Chief and all of that line of cars. I also took into account when Karen Beineman was picked up at the wig shop, that the witnesses conflicted on what they thought the bike was, either a Honda or a Triumph. So long story short, put all of that aside. What is consistent about those two is the color of the car being red or burgundy with a black top.
Right.
Yep. And then I got my third hit. And Joe, I called you on this, or Joseph, I called you on this and was blown away, and Deneen, and a red car, burgundy car with a black top shows up 8 years later in the Oakland County child killings.
This week, that hair found in Sloan's 1966 Pontiac Bonneville has the same mitochondrial DNA profile as hairs found on 2 of the child killer victims. The hairs do not match Sloan, but detectives want to know who else may have used Sloan's vehicle. Now, new records we've obtained.
So now we have 3.
Yeah, I mean, it blew my mind. I mean, and we've got multiple people in the cars. Okay. We go back to some of the other ones and you can hear like people talking about, they could hear 2 people talking. We know in the one case, there's 3 persons in the car. And yet, you know, it's like, well, John Norman did that. He dropped the other 2 on.
Didn't the first accounting of multiple people occur with the boys who found Mary in 1967?
Yeah, Robert, ain't that pretty much accurate? He was
Yeah, they were, I think they were playing in a field or pretty close to this farmhouse where she was definitely dropped. Possibly, I don't recall whether she was killed there or not, but and they heard a car pull in to the farm, heard a couple of people, these are the boys that found the actual body that they thought was just a deer carcass. They heard at least 2 people talking, and they believe they heard 2 doors slamming when they took off. So
yeah. Once again, there's other people involved, but it all comes down to like that doesn't fit the narrative.
yeah.
Right. It's always John Norman Collins,
Yeah.
and he did it all.
Yeah.
So
And
I don't think we're saying that John Norman Collins wasn't involved in anything.
Right.
I just think we're trying to say that's a simple kind of, I guess, just a simple kind of idea when you think, well, there's other people being mentioned. He drives all the way to California. And me and Robert love to talk about the fact that they didn't even seem to lean on that guy.
yeah,
You know?
the guy who was with Manuel.
Yeah. So
Manuel.
I mean, that's just crazy stuff as it is. So when you sit down and you go, okay, we stir all this stuff up, you know, we don't have this definitive answer of who did it, but we are clear that just to sit there and say, because you read something on the internet does not make it true.
This kind of will tip our hand as to where we think this goes, but it says the victim was not having her period at the time she was murdered. The smear from the vaginal vault indicated a presence of acid phosphate, which would tend to indicate the presence of seminal fluid, but no spermatozoa found. Well, Detective Schroeder, in one of the videos I think we've had on another episode, said that he interviewed after he had pulled all of the cold case DNA and ran all the DNA. And he had mentioned this to John Norman Collins in an interview, and I don't know when the interview was, but didn't he say something that John Norman Collins started crying? And
Yeah.
So the DNA came back to John Norman Collins, and Schroeder evidently sprung it on him. And
But we can't find anything that confirms that.
we cannot find, other than him saying it.
Yeah, that's not confirmation.
On the DNA, 3 months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, I don't know if you know this, Billy, I was called by the Michigan State Police. Meet us at the Ypsilanti Post, 2 detectives. So I said, Jesus, I haven't done anything, or what they want me for, you know. So, not that they can catch me for anyway. So I went over there, and I went back into the detective's office, and here were these old files against the wall. And I says, hey, those look familiar. They said, they ought to, they're yours. No. I says, what? These were all John Norman Collins files. He said, Doug, believe it or not, we had taken the panties, the nylons from Dawn Basom, not Dawn, one of the other girls, I can't remember their names, I'm sorry. Been too long ago. Bynum, yeah, I know. And we sent it in for a DNA. I says, you're kidding, after 30 years? He says, yes. And guess what? DNA came back, John Norman Collins. I said, oh. I said, why are you guys working on this thing 30 years later? Well, we want to, you know, in case he tries to come up with proof. I said, 30 years? Come on, you know, they want to close the case out. It's a cold case, and you've heard about them, I'm sure. And I said, now we're going to take but they went up and talked to John up in state prison. John's conwised, you know, he's not. So he's not going to talk to the officers. And I said, well, you know, you can't blame him. But then all of a sudden they said, well, look, John, all we want to know is, did you know this girl? Yeah. Had you been out with her? Yeah. Okay. What happened? Nothing. We just went and talked, and I took her on a motorcycle ride and so on. The DNA was on the outside of her pantyhose. A good attorney said, well, hey, his hand could have touched her leg. You know, that's not enough. So the other girl, the young girl, the Basom girl, they got her panties because there's semen in there. So they're sending that in. I haven't found out what happened yet, but they're working on that. So 30-some years, and we still now get some DNA.
Okay, or that if the police said it or the paper said it, doesn't make it true. Okay, and I think that's very, very important. Yeah.
Well, when I was trying to do research for this, and you put in Dawn Basom's name, and the first thing that comes up is the coed killings, Michigan murders, and John Norman Collins.
Yeah.
That's it. There's nothing else.
I did that today with Siri on my phone, and I asked Siri, I said, hey Siri, who killed Dawn Louise Basom in 1969? And Deneen, exactly what you said came back, all the data on the Michigan murders, just page after page.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and it's no matter what platform you go on either, because I've told you guys in our previous episode, I've used multiple platforms and it all comes back the same.
Yeah.
I think that to go back and just reemphasize one thing you said, when was it first said that the killing stopped? It was in a newspaper clipping, which I have somewhere on my computer.
Right.
Where our flamboyant sheriff, what was his name again?
Harvey.
Harvey. I kind of like him. He's colorful.
Flamboyant, I'll say that.
He was in a newspaper article right out of the gate after Collins was arrested, and he was asked by a reporter, how do you know you got the right guy? And he said, well, the killings stopped, didn't they?
Remember that, yeah, I knew we had the right guy, you know? I mean, all of a sudden our murders stopped.
Good, because I will tell you one thing. That was the beginning of closing this case.
Exactly.
It was the beginning of John Norman killed everybody.
Yep.
Okay, and that's what you got. But
And
go ahead.
When you look at that, and again, I won't go into great detail right now, but you guys know I've done a lot of digging on that.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I'm just guessing off the top of my head, I think I'm up to 33 dead souls.
Mhm.
And out of those 33, 16 are still missing.
Yeah. They didn't stop. Nothing of it stopped. I think that's the one thing about it. And we're going to do more of this, and we're going to come in and talk about myth, but we're also going to talk about a lot of murders and a lot of crime that has happened that people think they know the answer to, but they don't. And we'll get some guests in here and do some things. So we're going to be on there. Deneen, any final words on this?
Just don't believe everything you read.
Out of everything, that would be it. Robert?
To debunk myth, you need facts and evidence, of some type.
Yep.
And when there is no evidence to be found, then people want an answer, kind of like, and I think we'll eventually do an episode on the Kennedy assassination, right?
Yes.
So you could find almost any iteration of how he was killed and who killed him, right? And all of them make sense on the surface, right?
If you leave a void, somebody will fill it.
It will be filled.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens in a lot of these is there is a belief system that maybe we know more than we think we know. And I think on this Michigan murders, I think that's a big one.
Here is before we get through that, okay, here's the way to dispel the myth though, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That Detective Schroeder pulled out all of the cold case files back in 03 or 04. Okay. He sent everything that was DNA testable to the DNA lab. Okay. And it was done. Okay. This is what they arrested Gary Earl Leiterman and convicted him on.
Right.
Was that cold case DNA. Okay. And all of these, if they were DNA testable, supposedly they were done. And I believe they were thoroughly done. Okay. So they have never prosecuted anyone else because of the cost of prosecution. And I don't know why. Right.
Right.
I say cost of prosecution, but so the answer is out there. All right. Or in the box somewhere. Right. Is it foiable? They say investigation is still open. You cannot get it. Okay. It'll be 100 years from now and the investigation will still be open and you won't be able to get that DNA. So just, we said voids will be filled, but the answer is out there.
Yep. Dean, what you got?
Well, I guess in closing, I wanted to talk about one thing that you guys brought up in your podcast about Dawn Louise Basom. And you talked about her physical development, about, I guess there was a fight at her junior high school and Dawn cleaned house.
She held her own. We'll go with that.
She took care of business. So she was very, very strong in her body from what I can hear. I also found out that, I don't know if you guys knew this or not, but she rode horses.
See, I did not know that.
And her father had horses there at somewhere right in there. I don't know if it was at the house or at a farm nearby or whatever, but her and her friend rode horses quite often. So that tells me she was pretty athletic.
Yeah.
So when we talk about myth, I think that what strikes me is she walks over to this spot on LaForge and Getty's Road and turns, I'm sorry, LaForge and the railroad tracks, not Getty's, and turns north to the house some 200 yards away. What did she run into?
Right.
What was it that overpowered this girl? Was it one person? I don't know.
So,
I have read also that she used to like to wrestle with her brothers. She had brothers.
Yeah.
And she used to like to wrestle in the front yard with her brothers. So she was what they would call a tomboy. She loved, she was very active and loved, playing around. And so somebody taking her on, it had to be more, well, there we go with speculation, but had to be more than one.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that you have to keep in mind, and I don't know an answer on this one. I don't know if Dawn looked more like a 13-year-old or an 18-year-old.
Right.
So
there's only 2 pictures that we found.
That's it.
Exactly.
So I don't know. If you get into that and go, okay, well, she's young, but we don't know how she looked old. We don't know if she looked young. We don't know these things. But speculative, I think they've always said that she looked a little old. Though we got 2 pictures.
Yeah. And I think the last final closing thing I wanted to put in there is I feel like the answer lies in the car.
Yeah.
So.
It's cars, and it's the fact that on many of these, there's other voices. There's other.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that. Doesn't mean that we're exonerating anybody or convicting.
Right.
No.
It just means you get this information and they poo-poo it away like it's nothing, and we don't believe that.
Exactly.
So there's where we go. But as I said, it's hard to fight myth, and we all know that. So we're going to close up this one, and we'll be back in a few weeks, and we'll have some more Two Average Joe and True Crime Incorporated, because trust me, the murders did not stop in Michigan.
That's right.
I don't know where that crazy stuff came from. So look, once again, thank y'all for going. Hit subscribe, hit the like button. Take care of us, man. We need it. We need it. And we want to do a lot of this and we want to be successful. So make sure you hit that like button. and you hit subscribe. Mr. Robert, anything you got to say?
Only, and I would commend people to read Earl James's book, or at least there was another red car with a black top that had 3 boys in it that took a woman to a hotel and sexually had their way with her. And it was right around the time of the second killing. So there's a 4th incident for you, Dean, and it's in the Earl James book. And they didn't prosecute the boys because of who they were, I think, and he is using synonyms or whatever, not synonyms, but fake names again. So, but if you look in the footnotes, he actually puts the real names in parts of the footnotes of what they are and where the reports came from when he footnotes this stuff. So
in this Earl James book.
Yeah.
For our listeners, I'll have a link down.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, guys.
Very interesting.
Well, look, guys, appreciate y'all being here. We thank you for the people that are watching this. And in the meantime, y'all guys take it easy. And Robert?
There you go.
There you go.
Take it easy.
Take care.
Speak for me.
I wouldn't speculate even as to numbers. There's always a number of people who are missing, and this is just part of the business.